Hey, good morning, everyone. Happy Friday morning to you. Welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma, and this is video number 10 in our review and refutation of the book by Mr. Kyle Pope entitled Thinking About AD 70. We're going to get into that here in just a moment. Before I do that, however, I have to make an announcement. As you know, I've been struggling a great deal with my voice. A little over 2 months ago, I came down with strep throat, first time ever, hopefully the last time ever. And from that time, I've had a lot of difficulty with my voice. It does sound a little better, thank the good Lord. But I continue to have some soreness and irritation in my throat. And when I talk very long, my voice gets weaker and weaker. I have difficulty projecting. And so went to a voice specialist this week. And the good thing is that he found no nodules at all on my vocal cords. And the bad news is he had to run that stinking camera up my nose, and that is not good. But anyway, he told me couple of different things. He said, I'm not going to tell you, I'm not going to say that you must stop talking for a while, but I am going to highly recommend that you take a break. You need to give your voice a chance to heal. So, with that in mind, I need to let you know that I'm going to take about a 2-week hiatus from producing my morning musings. I'm not going to do my regular weekly, daily morning musings for 2 weeks. That includes my sessions in review of Mr. Pope's book. I'm not going to do, thankfully, I've got a couple of programs for Now TV already filmed ahead, and so I won't be doing that additional filming. I will not be on Two Guys in a Bible with William Bell for 2 weeks. And so I'm going to do my best to not talk for the next 2 weeks. And believe you me, that's hard to do. And so just want to let you know that I'm not going to be with you for the next 2 weeks. However, I have asked my good friend, Scott Fisher, to fill in for me. So Scott Fisher will be making videos for morning musings for the next 2 weeks. And I know Scott, and I know that Scott will do a great job, and I know that you will appreciate and enjoy his videos. So it's not like morning musings won't be here. So just be watching for Scott Fisher. My videos will be posted on Facebook, and of course, obviously, they will be here on YouTube as well. The second thing the doctor told me was, he said, by all means, you have to get off of caffeine. And he said, the very, very worst offender for caffeine is coffee. I said, are you telling me I got to get off coffee? And he said, yes. And I was like, say what? And he goes, well, you could drink caffeine. And I'm going, what's the point? And he said, well, I'm telling you, your throat is horribly agitated, got lots of irritation in it. So he said, drink decaffeinated, drink half and half, anything you can do to cut back on your caffeine. And so what I have here this morning and what I had starting yesterday was half and half. And yeah, okay, it's coffee. So that's a little bit. So I've got some changes I've got to make in order to retain my voice. I jokingly told somebody earlier in the week as they noticed my struggles and everything, and I gave them a little bit of my past history. I said, well, look, as someone who is an evangelist, a minister, etc., I said I rely on my voice and on my mind. There are times I can do without my mind, but I got to have my voice. And they thought that was kind of funny. So anyway, I'm doing the very best that I can. But again, I will not be with you for the next 2 weeks. Now then, I want to do this video number 10 in review and refutation of Mr. Pope's book, Thinking About AD 70. As I mentioned to you yesterday, we want to look at something called prophetic foreshortening. Now, you may or may not have heard that term before. So what does it mean? Well, let me give a little bit of background. On page 34 of his book, Mr. Pope gives some, quote, examples of apocalyptic and cosmological language. And he says, preterists offer various Old Testament prophecies that they affirm demonstrate figurative descriptions of judgments against or upon various nations. These include judgments of Babylon, Israel, Egypt, Edom, and Nineveh. Now listen very carefully here. We actually agree with some of their conclusions that these are figurative in nature. Where we differ with them is in their conclusion that these passages demand we interpret all New Testament prophecies figuratively, unquote. Then he gives us Isaiah chapter 13. And he said, we find a prophecy, quote, against Babylon, Isaiah 13:1. Her judgment is prefaced with the warning, wail, for the day of the Lord is at hand, Isaiah 13:6. This is describing a day of divine judgment, but it declares. And he reads verses 9 to 11, which is, I will cause the light not to shine. I will punish the world for its evil, the wicked for their iniquity. I will halt the arrogance of the proud, will lay low the haughtiness of the terrible. And he continues, therefore I will shake the heavens, and the earth will move out of her place. The wrath of the Lord of hosts, and in the day of his fierce anger. 13:13. Is this a literal description of what would happen in the Lord's judgment of Babylon? Yes and no. Yes, they would experience wrath and become desolate. But physical earth continued. The sun and moon continued to shine. The stars did not fall. We see similar things regarding Israel in Isaiah 24, Egypt, Ezekiel 32, Edom, Isaiah 34, and Nineveh, Nahum chapter 1, verse 5. And he says, preterists look at these texts and conclude that since the cosmological apocalyptic language was figurative, as it related to the judgment of these nations at the time, it must therefore be figurative anytime it's used. In other words, since it didn't happen then, it has no relationship to what will ever happen. How do we know that? Preterists look at these texts and argue that since the Jews could look at them and recognize these things had not happened literally, they would automatically interpret them as figurative references to world powers and systems falling and have no expectation of a literal fulfillment at any time in the future. Again, how can we know that? And then he says, we believe that such texts as this utilize something William Hendrickson calls prophetic foreshortening. And he explains, quote, by the process of prophetic foreshortening, by means of which, before one's eyes, the widely separated mountain peaks of historic events merge and are seen as one, two momentous events are intertwined. And so, here is Mr. Pope's explanation of how Isaiah 13 could predict the fall of Babylon and use hyperbolic metaphoric language, and then turn around and say, but the day of the Lord did not come. The sun is still shining, the moon is still shining, the stars are still in the sky. Now, ladies and gentlemen, here's something you absolutely have to understand about the argument about prophetic foreshortening. In other words, he appeals to Hendrickson, and Hendrickson is saying, well, you know, if you're looking out over the vista, and here is a mountain range, and beyond that is another mountain range, and it looks like they're close, when in reality they're far distant removed from one another. Well, in fact, that's not really true. You know, I used to live in Arkansas. In Arkansas, you have all sorts of mountains, and you have all sorts of vistas. You used to live in Oregon. Same is true up there, only their mountains made Arkansas's mountains look about that big. But I can tell you right now, you would never, ever, ever assume, okay, if I've got White Rock Mountain here, and if I've got another mountain range showing behind that, you would never conclude those mountain ranges are close. I don't know where William Hendrickson got this idea from, but it's not real life. And in Oregon, when you see mountain range, mountain range, mountain range, if you know anything at all, you know there is a vast difference between those mountains. So that's an experiential argument against Mr. Pope and his argument. Secondly, you have to understand that the only reason, listen to me carefully, the only reason that William Hendrickson and others adopted the mountain peak argument, as some have called it, or the prophetic foreshortening perspective, the only reason that they came up with that argument is this. They know that Isaiah 13, Isaiah 24, Ezekiel 32, Nahum, and other passages predicted the day of the Lord. They know that those passages said that the day was at hand. Well, Isaiah 24 didn't, and it was actually a prediction of the far-off future. Don't know if, I won't have time to get to that this morning, but I will touch on it. But since the language says, here's the day of the Lord, it was at hand, and it's the destruction of heaven and earth, they say, well, here, okay, we know that heaven and earth were not destroyed. See what they're doing? They are imposing a literalistic interpretation on the language of the destruction of creation. And they're saying, well, that didn't happen literally, therefore the language of imminence does not apply. Oh, well, wait. It does apply to the imminent judgment of that kingdom, that city, or that nation. So, while Isaiah said, well, for the day of the Lord is at hand, Mr. Pope says, well, the actual day of the Lord was not at hand. You know, Babylon fell in 536 BC, somewhere along in there. So the day of the Lord was not actually near. Oh, but wait, the destruction of Babylon was near. How would Mr. Pope know that the destruction of Babylon was at hand, but the day of the Lord was not at hand? Oh, by eisegesis, by saying, well, the sun's still in the sky, moon still gives its light, and the stars are still in the sky. Folks, that is, to repeat, eisegesis. It is assuming that the language of the destruction of heaven and earth must be literal. It demands that it is literal, and therefore he has to divide the text into and apply this imaginary prophetic foreshortening and say, well, while it sounds like the day of the Lord was at hand, it really wasn't. Oh, except the destruction of Babylon was at hand. Well, listen to me, ladies and gentlemen. It was not the destruction of Babylon that was at hand, as opposed to the day of the Lord that was not at hand. You would never, ever get that from reading the text. The day of the Lord is at hand. Well, so that forces Mr. Pope, as we will see later, to take the position that at hand, that time statements are not necessarily literal. And here's the irony. Time statements, therefore, become metaphoric. The language of decreation becomes literal. In fact, that turns the biblical hermeneutic and biblical language, completely reverses it. Absolutely reverses it. Now, very, very quickly, notice again that he appeals to Israel in Isaiah chapter 24. Well, you see, once again, what he is forced to do is to say the language of destruction of creation, now that's literal. But the destruction of the city, the nation, the kingdom in the text, that was at hand. Well, no, you know, I want to spend just a moment or two on Isaiah chapter 24. I'm going to begin reading verse 1. Behold, the Lord makes the earth empty and makes it desolate, or it makes it waste, distorts its surface, scatters abroad its inhabitants. It shall be as with the people, so with the priest, as with the servant, so with the master, as with the maid, so with his mistress, as with the buyer, so with the seller, as with the lender, so with the borrower, as with the creditor, so with the debtor. In other words, everybody's going to suffer alike. The land shall be entirely empty and utterly plundered, for the Lord has spoken this word. Okay, what is this? Well, according to Mr. Pope's hermeneutic, since it says the Lord makes the earth empty and makes it waste, this has got to be talking about the end of time. As a matter of fact, he goes down, verse 19, the earth is violently broken, the earth is split open, the earth is shaken exceedingly, the earth shall reel to and fro like a drunkard, shall totter like a hut, its transgression shall be heavy upon it, it will fall and never rise again. He applies this to the end of time, the imaginary end of time. So verse 1 must refer, in Mr. Pope's hermeneutic, to the end of time. Oh, but wait. Verse 4. The earth mourns and fades away. The world languishes and fades away. The haughty people of the earth languish. The earth is also defiled under its inhabitants. Well, there you go. See, that's the end of time in Mr. Pope's hermeneutic. How do we know it's the end of time? Well, because these things were not fulfilled literally. Once again, eisegesis. Oh, but wait. Let me start verse 4 again. The earth mourns and fades away. The world languishes and fades away. The haughty people of the earth languish. The earth is also defiled under its inhabitants, because here's the reason for the destruction of the world. Here's the reason for the destruction of the earth that is in view. Here's the reason for the destruction of the people, because they, the people, have transgressed the laws, changed the ordinance, broken the everlasting covenant. What did Israel refer to as the everlasting covenant? Now, here's something you need to know. The parallel to this passage is Hosea chapter 8 and verse 1 and Hosea 6, 6 to 7. And in those passages, parallels, okay, parallels, what was the covenant? What was the everlasting covenant that they had broken? It was Torah. It was not some vague, ambiguous covenant. It wasn't the Noahic covenant. How could they, by the way, how could man violate the everlasting Noahic covenant? That was a unilateral covenant that God made with man. Man could not violate that. And this is not talking about the gospel as the everlasting covenant. Well, how do I know that? Well, because as we continue, it says, oh, let me go ahead in verse 6. Therefore, the curse has devoured the earth. Those who dwell in it are desolate. Therefore, the inhabitants of the earth are burned. Few men are left. The new wine fails. The wine languishes. All the merry-hearted sigh. The mirth of the tambourine ceases. The noise of the jubilant ends. The joy of the harp ceases. They shall not drink wine with song. Strong drink is bitter to those who drink it. The city of confusion is broken down. Every house is shut up so that none may go in it. There is a cry for wine in the streets. All joy is darkened. The mirth of the land is gone. In the city, desolation is left, and the gate is stricken with destruction, when it shall be thus in the midst of the land among the people. Now, what do we find here? We have the destruction of the city of confusion. Well, in chapter 29, the city of confusion is known as Ariel, i.e., Jerusalem. Therefore, Isaiah 24, verse 10, is a prediction of the destruction of Jerusalem at the time of the destruction of heaven and earth. Because they who? The people, and by the way, that's what verse 13 points out to me. Who did Israel call the people? You know who that was. It was Israel. Furthermore, in verse 13, when it shall be in the midst of the land. So here's what we have. We have the destruction of the city of confusion, Ariel, which is Jerusalem. We have the destruction of the city that sits in the midst of the land. And Ezekiel 5, 8, and 9 describes that as Jerusalem. And we have the judgment of the people, not people, the people, because they violated the everlasting covenant that Hosea 8:1, Hosea 6:6-7 describes as the law of Moses. So here's what that means. If Mr. Pope is going to take Isaiah 24 as a description of the destruction of literal heaven and earth, then he's got to take the position that at the end of time, literal, physical Jerusalem, literal, physical Canaan, i.e. the land of Israel, and the destruction of the literal, the people, i.e. Old Covenant Israel. Well, listen, why would Mr. Pope take the position that at the end of time God's going to destroy Israel when he believes that God was already through with Israel at the cross? Why would God be concerned about destroying Israel at the end of time? The whole point here, ladies and gentlemen, is it is only because of Mr. Pope's presuppositional, literalistic hermeneutic, interpreting the language of the sun being darkened, the moon not giving its light, the stars of heaven falling from the sky. It is because he demands that is literalistic, woodenly literalistic language, and therefore, because because the literal physical creation was not destroyed when Babylon was destroyed, when Israel was destroyed in Isaiah 24, when Edom was destroyed in 583 BC, etc., then the language must be literal. No, that is imposing a presuppositional, literalistic hermeneutic on Hebraic language that is known to be metaphoric, known to be poetic, known to be non-literal. But Mr. Pope can't have that. So he imposes an artificial hermeneutic called the prophetic foreshortening onto the biblical text, which once again says the destruction of Babylon really was at hand, because the language says it was at hand. Oh, but wait, the language says it was the day of the Lord that was at hand. It doesn't say, the text does not say the day of the Lord is not at hand. The destruction of Babylon is at hand. But that's basically what Mr. Pope demands out of the language. Or else it means, yes, it says the day of the Lord was at hand. It really was not at hand, because time doesn't mean anything with God, which is truly a nonsensical argument. I'm sorry. God, as it were, created time. God knows how to, quote, appoint a day. God knew the day and the hour of the coming of the Lord, right? So how do we say God doesn't know how to tell time? So if God knew the day and the hour, if God could appoint a day, could he not know, could he not say, in truth, the day of the Lord is truly at hand, meaning the language of decreation is metaphoric. And I'll prove that to you as we proceed. Okay, in the meantime, go to my website, donkpreston.com, BibleProphecy.com. Order a copy of my book, The Elements Shall Melt with Fervent Heat. Mr. Pope makes a great deal about 2 Peter 3 in his book. We will be examining that. But go to my website, order this book, send me a note that says you saw the offer on YouTube or Facebook, and bundle this with a couple of other books and get your 15% discount for orders of $25 or more, U.S. orders only, for the rest of August 2021. And I document the metaphoric nature of this language extensively in this book. So be sure to get yourself a copy of it. Okay, let me repeat. I won't be with you for the next 2 weeks. I apologize for that. I wish it were different, but as you can tell, my voice is not happy. So, God bless. I look forward to being with you in about 2 weeks.